Welcome to Real Health with me, Carl Henry. Folks, how do we make positive changes for a healthy and happier life? What do we need to know about the heart? And what ages should we start thinking about these things? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the author of the Heart book, cardiologist, lifestyle medicine physician, and habits coach, Professor Robert Kelly. Professor Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carl.
Professor Kelly, TikTok star, Instagrammer, author. Dolgo. I'm really interested in that, and I want to start the interview there. That, you know, over the last probably year or two, is probably fair to say, you've gone from a very traditional role in medicine to being more out there. And as you were just saying before we come on, like, as your wife reminded you, no one knew who you were. And now you have a #1 book all about the heart. You have someone helping you with your social media. How are you finding all of that?
Honestly, it's crazy. I mean, in the last couple of weeks has been so busy. At the beginning of October, I did a TEDx talk in Tralee. So that takes a couple of weeks before it reaches the audience. So 3 weeks later, third week in October, TEDx talk launches. And TEDx Talk, very popular starting off, a couple of thousand views. There's a lot of work to try and get more viewers. Then the book comes out in the middle of November. The book gets pushed out to all the different media channels. The book goes to #1 in the Irish Times and the Irish Independent's bestseller in the first week. And there's loads of media and there's loads of attention. And at the same time, I have been trying to develop my social media. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Facebook already. The LinkedIn is attractive as a doctor because there's lots of professionals on LinkedIn. However, I'm not so good on Instagram and TikTok, so I got some help because that's what I do. So I have a great girl called Emma who runs my social media. Emma has been posting almost every single day on my social media. I have discovered I have loads of followers on TikTok. I know very little about TikTok. My kids do not like the idea of Dad being on TikTok, but they watch Dad.
You're not doing any dancing now, are you?
No. But that was the funny bit. My daughter said, well, why didn't you do a bit of the dancing, Dad, you know, and showed me how you can move all these different pictures around your TikTok and throw in a song and everything else. So it's, I'm learning. I'm a beginner on TikTok. I'm learning on the Instagram. I can see the pictures work better. And I'm following good advice from somebody else, just like any true doctor.
Are you enjoying it?
Absolutely. I really am enjoying it. It's interesting to see what people like. It's only been at sort of the last 8 to 10 weeks in terms of the TikTok and particularly the Instagram. So I'm just curious what people do actually like, because I talk about a lot of things. And really that's what's interesting to help me where I go for the next 12 months in sort of targeting certain areas of cardiology and certain areas of lifestyle medicine that people seem more drawn to.
So before you wrote the book and got into this new social media aspect, tell us about what you actually do.
So I'm a cardiologist. So by training, I learned how to put stents into people's arteries so that I could treat or prevent heart attacks. And through my training, I discovered that patients would start coming back and not necessarily be better after the stents, or the symptoms would come back again, or they'd want more tablets. And it was when you came to those sort of observations, what I actually found was that most of the patients weren't doing anything at all to deal with what was the root cause of the problem. So the smokers were still smoking. The people who had poor diets were continuing the same, and the rest is the same. So I would say to them, you know, the tablets are great, but they don't stop all the reasons why you had the heart problem. The reason the heart problem is coming back again is because you've made no changes to the cause. And then I went looking for an area of medicine that might lend itself to trying to deliver in that way. I was introduced to the area of lifestyle medicine through a GP in Ireland who kind of told me to go out to this course in America. The course was absolutely brilliant, completely opened my eyes up. And then I integrated the lifestyle medicine with my cardiology practice. And then in the last couple of years, as where all the changes happened, I introduced a coaching program for my patients, delivered it online through weekly group calls on Zoom, and found that the patients were responding in an incredible way. I mean, I was getting people to stop smoking. I was getting patients active. I was transforming patients' eating habits, eliminating stress. Still do, and still coaching patients, even coach staff members in the hospital, with a feedback to me at a personal level that was far greater than a lot of the other stuff I do. So it's really continued within that sort of space. The book is really good because it's a complete parallel of what I coach. The TED Talk is kind of the 10-minute version of the book. So they all align with the same theme.
Tell us about when people hear lifestyle medicine, then they're not quite sure what that is. Tell us what that is.
So lifestyle medicine is an area of medicine. So it's like cardiology, it's fully evidence-based. And lifestyle medicine is about the capacity to prevent, to treat, and to potentially reverse certain chronic diseases. So those chronic diseases are things like blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, cholesterol, heart disease, also cancers, and also Alzheimer's disease risk. So you have the capacity to prevent, to treat, and reverse. The big difference with lifestyle medicine, it's not about giving you a prescription in the doctor's office, sending you off with a booklet and saying, you do this yourself, because that's the problem. That doesn't work. So the way it works is that lifestyle medicine requires that you have a coaching skill. So I learned a certain coaching skill in terms of delivering change with patients, which works very, very effectively. And then you do have to engage other people like you, Carl. So, I mean, you need physical health professionals to help patients improve whatever their goal is around physical activity. You need the same with nutritionists. You need some support with mental health services, depending on what the challenge is for an individual patient.
Okay, so instead of just prescribing a tablet, you're prescribing a dietitian to improve the food, or a PT for exercise, or a coach to help you change your habits. It's prescriptive around the things that we can physically change ourselves without getting a tablet.
So I see my role in that I kind of connect the patient from doing the cardiology, treating the condition, going through the lifestyle aspects of their challenges, helping them to get into that position that they want to change. Some of them very successfully will change with me, but others want to go to a higher level of physical activity. So I tend to refer them on to either an exercise program or a coach. The same is true. It's not easy to change your diet from one thing to the other. It's easy enough to create smaller steps to get you going, but a lot of people need an ongoing relationship, for example, with a nutritionist to help them really make further progress.
And tell us, how did you get into cardiology?
So I come from a medical family. My mother and father are both surgeons. My father died during COVID. My mother is a retired eye surgeon. And so medicine was a very strong career within the family. Now, ironically, I didn't want to become a doctor when I was in the latter part in school. I wanted to do economics, and then I changed my mind very quickly for some reason and decided to become a doctor when I was in sixth year. And so when I went through medical school, there was always this idea, sure, you have to be a surgeon. Your parents are both surgeons. And then I decided, no, I didn't want to do that. So that was very much against the grain at the time. So I kind of sat down, spent a period of time trying to identify things that were kind of acutely caring for patients. So if you have a major problem, we could solve the problem and go after something like that. So cardiology fit very well into that type of realm. Ironically, now I spend much more time with patients than I do necessarily doing the acute stuff, but that's just the nature of practice.
Do you miss that?
No, I spend every Tuesday in the cath lab doing procedures. I put stents in patients. So I still get the balance of having both that and seeing patients. But everything that I have spoke to you about has evolved from me sitting down listening to patients. The book is a kind of a story of patients sharing their stories with me. The innovations that I see I've achieved in practice are entirely based on listening to what patients tell me.
Talk to me about James and his story. It's something that you open the book with, and I think it's a really good thing to bring into the podcast as well.
So I'm going to share another person who's not in the book who I actually saw today. Okay. Who's young, who's in his 30s, who did not have a normal heart test. And when he said to me, he came to see me, he said he assumed that his tests would be absolutely perfectly normal. And he was absolutely devastated to find out that they weren't so normal. And he has a touch of cholesterol and he has a family history of heart disease. But his dad's family heart disease risk only appeared when his dad was in his early 50s. So he's very, very young in his early 30s to get heart disease. There are two individuals named in the book with different names to their original names, but highlighting again mid-30-year-olds presenting either with a heart attack. There's another one who came to me. He was cycling one of those bikes with the wheelbarrow thing on the front of the bike with an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old going into work every morning, bringing them to school on the way in, getting chest pain, and thought that was just because the kids were heavy. And then, I mean, you're in your 30s, you don't expect that. So the guy from today is going to go on a cholesterol medication, doesn't require any stents. The two individuals mentioned in the book both required stents. And in fact, one of them ended up in a situation where he became quite unwell during the procedure by nature of the presentation. He's an interesting guy. We very successfully treated him. He went home a few days later. His wife was pregnant, expecting a baby the same week, so he didn't tell her what he was in hospital for. He told her he'd gone away on a business trip. And then he subsequently to that went back to work. Now, the standard of having a cardiac event and treatment is, yes, you can go back to work in a short period of time. But we do send patients for what's called cardiac rehabilitation, just to kind of ensure that you're taking the right tablets, that you're getting an early start on the prevention and making sure you're all right. So you're not supposed to go back to work, ignore the cardiac rehabilitation and pretend as if you just had a tooth taken out. So fortunately, the company he works for brought in a paternity leave benefit that included children, I think, from 10 and under. So he qualified for 2 already. So child number 3 arrived. He qualified for 3 children. He took 6 months off for paternity leave. And he finally completed his cardiac rehabilitation. And it was quite a turnaround. He hasn't quite admitted to me why he made those decisions. But in hindsight, I'm very grateful to the company for introducing paternity leave, because I'd be worried, particularly with them. Now, he and the other 30-year-old who were mentioned in the book are both alive and well 10 years later, absolutely fine, both taking treatments. The two that are interesting about those 2 stories is neither of those individuals had any risk factors for heart disease. One of them had a very slightly borderline cholesterol. They both ended up in very high-level jobs at a very early stage of their careers. I mean, so being put in charge of the whole workforce in your company when you're in your mid-30s is a little bit unusual, but a level of exceptional pressure in trying to manage a team of that size, particularly when you're in a new job and you really want to be kind of seen to be this absolute god that you've been created from an early age. So, as I said, the 2 of them are absolutely fine. But it's the reason it's mentioned is to highlight, heart disease happens at any age, and it happens young to some people, and it's not something that you should ignore because you think, I'm too young, this will never happen to me. Where you're in that situation, you don't feel so well and something's not right, at the very least, you should go down and talk to the GP and let the GP check you over.
Well, that's my next question, obviously, is in terms of what should people be looking out for?
So in the general population, I'm talking generally, you're talking 40 years of age plus, because you don't see many people below that with heart disease of this nature, so the stuff that causes heart attacks. You should be looking after chest pain. You should be looking after chest pain that feels like a weight on your chest, or that goes up into your neck, your jaw, or down your left arm. Or if you're short of breath, or if you're feeling that the heart is galloping like racing horses. Or alternatively, if you're just not feeling right, if you're much more fatigued than you usually would be, that might be an early sign. Now, the group of patients that have to be careful is women can sometimes not get those typical symptoms. Sometimes the pain might be up the other side of your chest on the right-hand side. But again, if something comes on you out of the blue that's not really fitting with the way you normally are, that doesn't seem right, the message is to act on it. Don't kind of hold back and say, oh, sure, I ate a bad dinner last night, or some other reason that might justify a symptom that does come with a consequence. And you don't have to rush into the hospital unless you feel very unwell. Go down and see the doctor and let somebody else give you an objective assessment. And
the environmental stress, then, from what we're saying prior to that, is super important. That it's that big a problem in terms of the stress on the heart.
So I think that the big problem with stress at the moment is related to work. And I don't think it's because of COVID. I think it was there before COVID, because if you look at the medical profession were burnt out before COVID appeared. It's unfortunate that by the nature of COVID, what that did to the medical profession. Mm-hmm. During the medical profession, particularly in the UK, there's a very high rate of suicide around that time related to stress. In the medical profession now, there's a very high burnout level by virtue of the nature of work. In other professions, there's a very significant level of burnout as well. And I, traditionally am seeing a lot of patients who come into me with a story that they're exhausted. They may have heart palpitations. They may be short of breath. They're coming in all ages, 40 to 50, as much later. And the typical story is that they're very tired. They wake up in the morning tired, despite having a night's sleep. They go to work. They work a really busy day. They usually skip lunch, or they're sitting at the desk eating their lunch. They go home, some at 5, some at 6, some at 7. Invariably, they miss the gym because they're too busy. They go home, they have dinner, and they fall into bed because they're exhausted. Now, they might slip in a few glasses of alcohol. They might eat the dinner late. There might be a few treats. They might be in front of the TV. But the life is just a complete treadmill. In some women's case, what they do is they go home, they look after the kids, and then depending who you work for, the laptop will often come back out again after dinner. You're working on, further like American times or Asian times. and then you're into bed exhausted. And so you don't get a quality night of sleep. That's best informed by the fact that during the day you're so busy that you don't have time for anything else. You fall asleep because you're exhausted. And unfortunately, you give up all the things that would ordinarily help you cope with stress. You give up the gym, you give up the fresh air, you're still stuck at the desk. You add in the poor eating habits. You probably don't sleep partly because you're worried about a lot of things. And unless you have some medical conditions like the snoring related ones or other sort of thrashing around the beds, which do need you to see a doctor, the vast majority of people, that's what chronic stress looks like.
And that is the modern existence.
And that is the modern existence, but I think we've cut the time even further, that we've kind of still at the desk at lunchtime. We're not taking any degree of small levels of exercise. I'm not sure whether we're just taking on more work. I sometimes sense we are. We're very bad at saying no to things. We're really, really bad at looking after ourselves. We're very good at looking after everybody else. Some people think that if a certain guru says get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym, then that'll work. But the irony is you're so tired by lunchtime that you won't function for the afternoon. So,
and the impact of that on the heart, is it the fact that the heart is beating at a higher rate than normal and not getting recovery?
It's not.
Obviously, the food link is different in terms of cholesterol. Obviously, I get that, but in terms of the lifestyle impact.
So the stress link is interesting. There is interesting around the time of those two younger gentlemen mentioned in the book. There was a medical paper published in the UK in the Lancet reporting that people who have chronic repeated stress measured on a questionnaire, very like what the story I've just defined, had about a 30% higher risk for having heart attacks and strokes and premature death 5 years beyond. What they did was all those patients had MRI studies, and when you're very stressed, there's a little piece of your brain called your amygdala, which is responsible for your fight or flight. So when you're under a lot of stress, or somebody's chasing you, whatever it might be, your amygdala tends to light up. But the other thing in the MRIs that was lighting up is that your spleen was lighting up. Now, your spleen is a source of what are called white blood cells. They traditionally fight infection, but they're also a cause of what's called inflammation. And the heart also lights up a little bit like a Christmas tree for the same reason. So there is something about stress triggering inflammation in the body that relates to why people get more cardiac events. There's a lot of other changes in terms of hormones. There's a lot of other changes in terms of the stress of cells within your body. And certainly the heart rate variations will be a manifestation of the stress response itself. But the risk here is ongoing stress. It's not the acute stress that you're late for work or that you've just proposed to your fiance. It's not that. The stress is just chronic, repeated life, a little bit like I've just described.
Yeah, okay. And chat to me about healthy eating then. So you talk about that obviously in the book. How does that look from a cardiologist's perspective? When you're chatting to your clients, what are you saying to them?
Well, the thing about, as I said, about lifestyle medicine is that it's evidence-based. So evidence-based means that there's medical data, medical papers that back up and support the choices of treatment that we as doctors take. So there are two healthy eating regimes. One is the Mediterranean diet and the other is the whole food plant-based diet. The whole food plant-based diet is a real American approach to healthier eating. The Mediterranean diet obviously comes from a European background. Both of those approaches are shown to significantly cut the risk of heart disease almost in half. And therefore, I'm a huge fan of those diets. They also have a huge impact on risk for Alzheimer's, risks for cancer. The Mediterranean diet and the whole food plant-based diet differ purely that the Mediterranean diet allows you to eat a small amount of meat. The emphasis on really eating fish 3 days a week, taking the balance of fruit and vegetables, more nuts, extra virgin olive oil, obviously, for the Mediterranean diet, lots of water. But the Mediterranean diet is also to encourage you actually to be quite sociable, go out with friends.
It's a time thing as well.
Yeah, so it's like, not a diet. I hate the word diet. I think that diet is like punishment to most people. When you get punished and do a diet, unfortunately, you put the weight back on again a few weeks later. That's what happens with every diet. The whole food plant-based diet is quite similar. It just cuts out all the meat. Now, the data around the whole food plant-based diet, in truth, is when you follow up on it, most people do eat a small amount of meat and do eat fish and chicken. So they're very, very similar in truth. But the diet also encourages different approaches to life, that you eat slower, that you don't eat like everything on the plate, which is a little bit of an Irish challenge. But, you try. And if you look at other diets, there are parts of the world called blue zones where people generally live to 90 or 100. The diet that relates to that group of people is very, very similar to the Mediterranean diet as well.
The biggest rate of blue zones, or the area for the biggest amount of centenarians in Ireland, is the West Coast, Mayo, Donegal part of the world.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. So I'm very friendly with a gentleman called Michel Poulain, who's the scientist behind the blue zones.
Okay.
So he's done all the science work from all over the world, and I've sat there, watched his talks. But I asked Michel Poulain, is there any chance Ireland could be a blue zone? Now, the way it's worked out is worked out on the year of your birth. And so it's a statistical modelling that, say, people born in the 1920s would live to 100, as opposed to people born now where the health may be better. So I approached the Oris because I knew President Higgins celebrates everybody's 100th birthday. And I was told for data protection they couldn't give me the information, but they very kindly connected me to the census office.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So I went to the census office and I was given a number of spreadsheets to look at, and looked at where all the centenarians are. They're not just in the west of Ireland. There's a large proportion in southern Cork.
Go on, I'm kind of guilty. You!
There's a scattering in Galway. There's a scattering in Dublin. And I suppose one of the interesting things around it is your census, for those of you who've done it, you all have to be in the same house. So the only explanation for the clusters of all the centenarians has to be that they're all in nursing homes in these different parts of the world, of Ireland.
But they're again, they're close to the sea. They're hilly areas. They're areas that are generally quite high in social connection. And then the dietary piece kind of has to come with that. But
absolutely. But I have lots of patients who, I have a lot of patients in their 90s. I have a few who've reached into 100. Many of them have heart disease. They're not with me just because I like looking after 90-year-olds and 100-year-olds. They all have heart disease. They all have something quite purposeful about their lives. I have a guy, he's 96, he loves to go walking. I think he's mentioned in the book, actually. He walked 500 kilometres last year, and he said to me when he came in last year, he says, I'm going to do 600 kilometres. Now, he's 96 years of age. So he walks around his garden because he knows if he walks on the paths, he has a risk he might fall over. So he times himself. So you go out in the garden, it's a small garden, he'll do 20 laps of a day. He knows softer parts of the garden to impact on the fall. So they're very strong-minded people. And the other thing, the big thing with centenarians, with blue zones, is they're very good in social connection. So they score exceptionally highly in terms of connecting with family, with friends, and with other people. And that's a big, big reason that they get to live so long.
Habit, then, and habit forming. It's something that people do struggle with, don't they? Again, I'm picking your brains here, we're live in one of your client sessions, but it's interesting in terms of what do you feel, you're getting amazing results with clients. The book is full of great content. For tips for people to take away from the interview in terms of habit changes and how they can do it, what do you recommend?
So I got into habits because I was looking for something in my busy life that was nice and simple and straightforward as a way to help patients change behavior. So I learned my habits work from a guy called BJ Fogg. He's based in Stanford. He wrote a book called Tiny Habits. And the book is principled on the fact that you have to remember to do the habit, so that's a trigger or an anchor. So a good example is when you lie down in bed tonight and your head is on your pillow. So that is your trigger. So the behavior, I give an example in the book, which is my favorite behavior, my favorite little habit, and that is doing a practice of gratitude. Now, the practice of gratitude, the easiest way in the world you can do it is just think of one or two things today that you're most grateful for and feel what that feels like to be grateful for that. So pick something that's really meant something for you in the day. And then BJ Fogg has one extra piece to the behavior. To make the behavior last, you have to, at the minute of doing the gratitude habit, you have to celebrate it. So what he does is he suggests any form of celebration. So celebrations are things like a smile on your face when you're lying in the bed tonight, or a little high five or a thumbs up. You have to do that the minute you think you're grateful for. And the reason is because behaviors only become habits when you make them fun to do and you emotionalize them, because you have to enjoy doing the behaviors, like any other behavior, to make it become a habit. And so you start very small. So it might be we're lying on the pillow tonight, you think of things you're grateful for, it makes you feel good, you give it a smile, you go to sleep. And tomorrow you might do 2 habits, and you might after a week go to 3 and go 4. Now, gratitude is a wonderful behavior to practice because it lowers your stress level, it helps you sleep, it's exceptionally good for your heart health. So I really, really like gratitude. It also calms your mind in a wonderful way that really helps you process the rest of the day. So it has a lot of benefits, but you can replace the behavior with something else. I have another favorite for patients. A lot of people who are a little bit older are not very good at drinking water. So one of the ways is, well, how do I remember to drink the water, Robert, if I want to make it a new habit? And so when you go for breakfast tomorrow morning, you sit down in the kitchen tomorrow, have a glass of water beside you already on the breakfast table, or you might leave the jug out tonight with a glass. Fill the glass. So you're sitting down for breakfast. There's your trigger. Take the glass of water and drink it. Don't forget to give the high five and the celebration. Go through the rest of breakfast. Maybe the next day you'll add it to lunch. That'll have you 2 meals. Or maybe you go to dinner for a bonus the third day. So in a week's time, you'll be well able to even take 2 glasses for breakfast, 2 for lunch, 2 for dinner. And again, it's not about drinking 100 glasses of water a day. And it's not about drinking all the water at night because you'll end up getting out of the bed all night. It's about adding a new behavior that's good for your health, doing it in a very, very simple way that works very effectively. Now, there are a couple of other tricks that go with it to make you remember to do it, because if you're going to do this over weeks, months and beyond, you're going to have to remember to it. So you may have to keep a record or track it to some degree. But all these behaviors are mentioned in the book, and they're all aligned in ways that fit in with lifestyle medicine as a way to help your heart health.
Okay, so it's very much that 1% Atomic Habits kind of vibe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
It's the exact same. Fogg is kind of the grandfather of all of that. James Clear's book evolves from that, as do a number of other books.
Okay, and if a lot of the success coaches haven't been to one or two in their events, they work off that idea of celebration, and they have you doing very odd celebrations. But we won't go into that. That's another story for off mic. If you would like our listeners to take 3 key things from today's chat, what would you like them to take? Because we have a big audience here, and we will absolutely have you on again, by the way. You're fascinating. You're very interesting. For this episode, what would you like them to take away?
So most importantly, engage with your health. So be aware to the fact if something isn't right, that you go and see somebody instead of putting that off and saying, sure, I'll be fine. And particularly if you're over 40, go and do it anyway. Go and have a health check. Let somebody check you over. Particularly the men out there who are less likely to go in. Just go and get checked out. You're better off picking up things at this stage of your life that you can have something done with. Don't feel that you're immune from something because everybody else is healthy, and don't feel you're immune from something because your brother or your sister has the problem. What often happens is something happens to a friend and that goes and triggers you to do something. But don't wait. And there are certain tests you can have done by seeing a doctor or a cardiologist. I think the other aspect to realize as well is that I mentioned about diets. And unfortunately, a lot of us go and do the same thing again and again and again, and it doesn't really work. If you learn other ways, a little bit like the habits method, you can very successfully change your behavior. If you get your mindset right, you can sustain that behavior once you do it in the right way. And I really, really encourage people not to give up on the idea that Robert, I've tried to lose weight before, it never comes off. I've tried to stop smoking. I've tried to do this. And, if you read the book, actually, the 1st of January is just around the corner here. And so it's a great opportunity to actually set yourself up for a successful 2025 with sustained changes in your behavior, as opposed to going on that diet or the stopping smoking that you're going to give up, unfortunately, by the end of the first week in January.
Professor Robert Kelly, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. You came in quite not very nervous. You hit it very well, and that was really interesting. Really, really interesting. And we will absolutely have you on again for maybe a habit episode or something like that. But the book is called The Heart Book. It is in all good bookstores nationwide. It is on Amazon as well. It is a #1 bestseller. So it is full of lovely content. And we're delighted to have you on today. So much appreciated. Folks, we really hope you enjoyed today's episode of Real Health with me, Carl Henry. As ever, you know where we are at Carl Henry PT on Instagram, realhealth@independent.ie, and on the Irish Independent website. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to rate and review. And Robert, finally, your social media handle on Instagram
is drrobertkelly.ie.
You can check him out there. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Slán go fóill.